There's a blueprint for the next chapter of humanity, and it's underground. A city built to survive a collapse. That idea, it goes way back. It's in old myths. And it's in modern plans, so by the end, you'll see how you could build a place like that, and what it would mean about us, why ancient people imagined hidden worlds, how engineers today might really make one, what we'd save if everything was at stake, whether a society could actually live down there in the dark. The answers, they tell a story about fear and ingenuity and the light we keep inside. What's worth preserving for 1,000 years? Plato's Atlantis is usually about a place that sank. But maybe we've had the angle wrong. Maybe it wasn't about a civilization that drowned. It was about one that saw the flood coming and tried to hide from it. The idea shifts. It becomes a story of foresight, a people so advanced they might have built a sanctuary, not just on an island, but inside it. That's the first thread of an ancient blueprint. Cultures all over the world, completely isolated, kept telling versions of the same story. Norse mythology has Svartalfheim, a vast, cavernous realm under the roots of the world tree. Home to master craftsmen who work in the dark. In Buddhist and Hindu traditions, there's Shambhala, a hidden kingdom sealed away in a remote valley, a place of peace that will only be revealed when the world is ready. The Cherokee spoke of the Nanehi, immortal beings who lived inside mountains. They'd emerge to guide their people in times of trouble. These aren't random fantasies. Mythologists like Joseph Campbell spent their lives tracing these patterns. He saw the recurring theme of the hero's journey into the underworld, not as a trip to a place of death, but as a descent into a realm of profound transformation. It's where you go to find forgotten knowledge, to be tested, and to return with the means to survive a great crisis. What these stories collectively draw is a psychological map. They reveal a deep, instinctual human belief. When the surface world becomes too dangerous, too corrupted, or too unstable, salvation lies in going deep. It lies in creating a space that is hidden, protected, and self-contained. That's the true template. Long before any engineer sketched a bunker, these myths provided the core principles for a refuge. They envisioned a community isolated by design, sealed away from whatever storms, literal or metaphorical, raged above. They imagined a place where the essential knowledge of a culture could be preserved intact. Its crafts, its laws, its values. The stories answered a fundamental anxiety. What do we do when everything outside falls apart? The ancient answer was clear. You build a world within the world. You go down and you wait for the right time to come back up. This blueprint, written in symbol and story, set the stage for every real attempt that would follow. It transformed a primal fear into a narrative of hope, and that narrative would eventually demand to be built. That blueprint from myth, it was eventually pulled from the earth. Made real, deep in Cappadocia in Turkey, there's a labyrinth of stone that goes down more than 250 feet. Derinkuyu, it's not a cave. It's a city carved by hand from soft volcanic rock, 18 levels. It could shelter 20,000 people. For months, you walk the corridors and you see a complete society. Living quarters, storerooms for grain and oil, wine presses, chapels, stables for livestock. The engineering is something else. Over 50 ventilation shafts brought fresh air all the way to the deepest chambers. Deep wells gave water independent of the surface, and the entrances were sealed with these massive circular stone doors, rolled into place from the inside. Each one weighing hundreds of pounds, locking the world out. This wasn't built for some theoretical future. It was a direct response, a dangerous present. For centuries, this region faced waves of invasion. When armies swept across the plains above, the whole community could vanish into the ground, safe. Self-sufficient, Derinkuyu is a monument to pragmatic fear, to brilliant adaptation. It proves the underground metropolis isn't science fiction. Our ancestors did it. They turned the Earth itself into a shield. Centuries later, halfway across the world, the same impulse surfaced under very different skies during the Cold War. Beneath the streets of Beijing, another hidden city took shape, the underground city, Dixia Cheng, a civil defense project on a staggering scale, a network of tunnels and bunkers built in secret. Designed to house 6 million people, it had hospitals, schools, theaters, shops, its own food production, water purification. It was a mirror world. A silent duplicate of the city above, waiting in the dark. What connects these two places, 1,000 years apart? A vast cultural divide. The drivers are similar. Hauntingly similar, security from an overwhelming external threat. The desperate, determined preservation of community life. In both cases, going underground wasn't a retreat into fantasy. It was a strategic choice for continuity, ensuring that a way of life, a culture, a population could endure when the surface became uninhabitable. The Earth wasn't just a hiding place. It was the ultimate fortress. These historical endeavors, they shift the conversation. They move the idea from story into the domain of engineering, social planning. They answer a critical question: can it be done? Derinkuyu and the Beijing underground city stand as a resounding yes. Proof of concept, written not in scrolls but in stone and reinforced concrete. They show that when survival is the only priority, human ingenuity can carve out a world beneath our feet. But this proof raises a deeper question, a more unsettling one for our own time. If our ancestors built these refuges for protection from armies and bombs, what unseen forces are we preparing to hide from today? The next iteration of the underground metropolis wouldn't be carved from soft rock. It would be silicon and steel, designed for a threat far more abstract and potentially far more final. The Cold War brought this feeling of total collapse. It made it immediate. For decades, the world lived under the threat of nuclear conflict. That threat wasn't vague, it was specific, it was technical. You had fallout sirens, you had civil defense drills. That dread created the bunker, government complexes, private backyard shelters. The impulse was the same. To carve out a small pocket of safety, a place to wait out the blast and then the fallout. The underground was a short-term shell, an emergency space. But the fears now are different. They've evolved. They're slower, more complex, more insidious. We face the gradual pressure of a changing climate, rising seas. Stronger storms, long droughts. These things threaten the habitability of whole regions. We've seen a global health crisis stop societies. It revealed fragile supply chains. It showed social tensions, and there's this unease about cohesion itself, this sense that the structures we rely on might be fragile, so the goal has shifted. The underground isn't just imagined as a shelter for a few weeks anymore. It's being rethought as something more ambitious, a permanent habitat, a self-sustaining one. An arc, people who study existential risk, the threats that could derail civilization, they point to this progression. When the surface world feels systemically precarious, the dream of a controlled environment becomes compelling. That's the psychological shift. It moves from a reactive hideout to a proactive colony. It answers a question. If the world above is unstable, unpredictable, maybe hostile, where do you build the next version of normal? The answer for more thinkers and planners is to build down, to create a sealed ecosystem where temperature and atmosphere and food and water are all under control. Insulated from the storms overhead, the meteorological storms and the social ones, it reflects a perception that the old foundations are cracking. So the blueprint from our oldest stories, the one history proved possible, is being updated. Updated with advanced technology, the subterranean arc isn't just about surviving one catastrophe anymore. It's about preserving a way of life indefinitely. In a world that feels like it's losing its balance, but this vision presents a challenge, an immense one, not a challenge of excavation but of creation. How do you build not just a shelter but an entire world, a functioning world that has to provide everything? The first sketches weren't about bunkers. They were gardens, sunlit domes, quiet forests, all buried under a mountain. That's the vision, a self-sustaining ecosystem in a bottle. You have these vast chambers, geodesic shapes, with ceilings that glow with a precise kind of artificial light. Agricultural terraces stacked in layers where crops grow without soil, just a nutrient mist, and the water never leaves. It just cycles, endlessly purified, through systems that mimic a wetland or a forest. This whole idea has a name, Biospherics, the science of closed ecological systems. It asks a question: can you build a miniature Earth that needs nothing from outside? Every breath there is a calculation. You can't rely on an open sky for air, so designers look to the oldest life, walls of green algae under lights consuming carbon dioxide, releasing oxygen. Or vast indoor forests where photosynthesis becomes the colony's lungs. Waste isn't something to throw away, it's a resource. Anaerobic digesters can break it down, capture methane for energy, leave behind compost to feed the next cycle. And the energy for all this, the Earth provides a constant heat. Geothermal taps drawing warmth from the planet's core could give you the baseline power. For the lights, the pumps, the climate control, it's a symphony. Every output has to become an input somewhere else. Architects and futurists play with these ideas. One thought experiment is called Project Persephone, a design challenge to create a habitat meant to last 1,000 years. The goal isn't just structural integrity. It's cultural continuity, biological continuity. The designers have to account for every gram of carbon, every liter of water, every nutrient. They have to plan for soil microbes, for pollinators, for the fungal networks that keep plants healthy. They have to design redundancy on top of redundancy, because if one algae tank fails, the air still has to be breathable. If one crop fails, you need 10 other food sources. Project Persephone makes the scale clear. You're trying to compress the infinitely complex web of a planetary biosphere into a managed, human-made machine. A machine that can't break for centuries, but that technical puzzle, that monumental problem, is only the first layer. It answers how a body could live underground. It leaves a harder question. How does a society live there? How does a community thrive without horizons, without seasons, without a sky? The sealed environment solves problems of physical survival, but it creates new ones for the human spirit. The real test of an underground city might not be its air filters or its crop yields. It might be the psychology of the people who have to call it home. The sealed environment handles the body's needs, but it creates a test for the mind. A city underground has no natural light, no weather, no open horizon. The social architecture becomes as critical as the physical supports. Think of the first council meeting, air recyclers humming. These leaders aren't debating taxes. They're deciding the fundamental rules for a civilization in a bottle. Who makes those rules? The models are starkly different. One vision is pure technocracy. Governance by the experts who understand the life support. Engineers, biologists, systems analysts. Your influence is tied directly to your proven skill for maintaining the ark. A meritocracy of survival. Another model is direct participatory democracy. Every citizen has a voice in every major decision, because in such a confined space, disenfranchisement could be fatal. It could breed the resentment that unravels everything. Then there are more radical ideas, a resource-based economy. Traditional money has no meaning, you can't spend it outside. Instead, decisions are made through computer models, models that manage the allocation of air, water, food, living space, based on sustainable carrying capacity. The system itself becomes the governor, but no system runs itself. It runs on people, which is why the selection process would be unlike any other. It wouldn't just be about skills. It would involve deep psychological screening, not to find perfect people, to find people whose flaws are compatible, who can handle the pressure, the lack of privacy. The constant awareness that your neighbor's mistake could affect your heir. Role assignment becomes a delicate science. You need farmers and mechanics. But you also need artists, storytellers, conflict mediators, people whose job is to tend to the community's spirit, to create meaning in the endless artificial day. We have glimpses from historical experiments. The Biosphere 2 project in the 1990s, 8 people sealed inside a 3.1-acre closed ecosystem for 2 years. It was a scientific mission, but it became a lesson in human dynamics. Tensions arose over food shortages, over differing work ethics, over personal conflicts with no escape. Factions formed. The social ecosystem they found was far more fragile than the biological one. It showed that no amount of engineering can solve for human emotion. For ego, for the simple need for space, this forces a difficult question. In an environment where every resource is counted, where collective survival is the ultimate goal, what happens to individual freedom? Would your right to privacy be limited because emotional distress is a community health risk? How would justice work if someone intentionally damages a water recycler, an act that endangers everyone? What is the appropriate consequence? Exile is impossible. Imprisonment consumes precious resources. The society would have to invent new forms of restorative justice, focused on repair and reintegration, because you cannot afford to lose a single pair of working hands. Or to create a permanent enemy living down the hall. This exploration of social engineering reveals the true weight. Building the life support is one thing. Building a society that won't tear itself apart in the dark is another. It leads to the final calculation, perhaps the most haunting one. If you are building an ark to preserve civilization, what exactly are you preserving? What books, what music, what ideas do you load into the cultural vault? This decision, more than any other, would define the future that grows from the seeds you save. The selection process becomes a mirror for the whole species. You picture a final committee somewhere deep underground. They're looking at a packing list for a 1,000-year journey. Not just seeds or tools, but the essence of what we've done. Which book gets a spot? A sacred text maybe, or a philosophy, or instructions for a water pump. Do you take Shakespeare or the plans for a solar panel? It's the Library of Alexandria problem, but permanent. That library was a single point of failure. Losing its set knowledge back centuries, an underground city can't make that mistake. Its archive has to be redundant, distributed, encoded to last. We see pieces of this now. The global seed vault up in the Arctic permafrost, that's a frozen backup of our crops, or the Arch Mission Foundation, etching libraries onto nickel foil, planning to scatter them. These are prototypes for the city's cultural DNA, but the choices show our biases. Does the committee pick a symphony or a medical textbook? Do they store genetic codes for every species, a frozen arc of Earth's life? Or use that space for social blueprints, constitutions, legal frameworks, histories of conflict? This curation is an argument about what gives life meaning when survival is already set. Is meaning in the practical or the sublime? The archive becomes a self-portrait of a civilization looking inward. It says, this is what we thought was important. This is what we thought defined us, but preservation has a risk. By choosing what to save, you choose what to erase. You decide which voices from the past get to speak. The culture that comes out of the vault 100 generations later won't be our full, messy story. It will be the story we wanted to tell, a polished legacy. With the contradictions stripped out, the dark chapters left behind, would that future society, born from that purified seed, even understand the world that made it? Would they feel the weight of what was lost? The process forces a question no engineering schematic can answer. If you build a perfect, sealed world to preserve the body of civilization, what happens to its soul? The silence underground would be total. No wind, no rain, no birds, just the hum of machinery and the sound of your own breathing. A world with no weather, no horizon to mark time. That psychological space could be harder than any engineering problem. We're built for the surface. Our internal clock needs the daily shift from light to dark. Without it, sleep breaks down, energy drops, moods can shift. You see it in the studies from Antarctic stations, crews in the winter darkness. They call it winter over syndrome, irritability, depression, a kind of fog. Submarine crews on long patrols know it too, living in a steel tube under pressure. There's an old name for it, cave fever. This restless feeling of being closed in that can turn into claustrophobia or paranoia. And in a sealed city, you can't just step outside. You can't walk under an open sky to reset. The walls are always there, the physical ones and the social ones. So the countermeasures have to be part of daily life, built in, not a luxury but infrastructure, virtual windows in rooms showing a forest or a beach, somewhere for the eyes to go. Mandatory group activities, shared meals, theater to force connection, break the isolation, mental health check-ins, counseling, as normal as checking the air. And that raises a deeper question. What happens to human consciousness without the natural world? We came from sunlight and seasons, from open landscapes and changing skies. Our art, our sense of self, is tied to that. Raise generations in a controlled, artificial biosphere, and what happens to that tie? Would they dream of rivers they've never seen? Would a storm become just a story? Knowing the mind's limits isn't about weakness. It's what keeps a city alive, and not just a tomb. That need for an anchor to something beyond the walls, it pushes the next layer of innovation. If the human spirit needs it, then technology has to find a way. The city runs on one rhythm. It's that hummed geothermal turbines pulling heat from the planet's core. That power runs everything. It goes up through fiber optic lines to the ceiling, to those panels that glow with a perfect sky. A sky that shifts from a soft morning blue to noon brightness, then to this warm, gold sunset. That light isn't just light, it's a biological need, a technological lifeline for the mind, and the whole city breathes because of atmospheric processes. Huge chambers where air moves through chemical scrubbers, through living walls of algae, balancing oxygen, filtering out every trace of carbon dioxide. The air is cleaner than any mountain peak, just as carefully managed. Communication is another pillar, redundant systems on top of redundant systems. Beyond radio, there's theory about something like neutrino messaging, particles that pass straight through the Earth, a quantum encrypted signal whispering through solid rock to other outposts. A way to say we're still here and to ask are you? That network is the city's nervous system, and the medical bay is its immune system, a compact facility where automated surgical arms work with doctors, where AI cross-references symptoms against every known illness, built for long-term care with no surface hospital to send anyone to. That level of integrated tech finds a parallel in the proposed Mars habitats. The challenges are the same: a sealed environment, total reliance on machines, systems that have to run and repair themselves for decades. These technological pillars aren't negotiable. Their continuous operation is the only thing between a living civilization and a dark, silent tomb. If a major processor fails or power is lost for good, it doesn't mean discomfort. It means a swift, irreversible collapse. That absolute dependency creates a low-grade anxiety. It makes the security of these systems the main concern for everyone. Because the biggest threat to the city might not come from the world above. It could come from inside its own walls. One act of sabotage, one critical error. Or a slow, undetected decay in a pipe. Any of it could unravel everything. That realization shifts the social contract. It turns every resident into a guardian. And it raises the final, hardest layer of design. How do you protect a world that has nowhere left to run? The systems that give life also create the most terrifying points of failure. The main entrance is a single point of strength, a door meters thick made of composite alloys, built to withstand force from the world above. But that door is just the first layer. Security down here is about defense in depth. It's not one barrier, it's many, a series of rings, concentric protection. Behind that main door, you'd have a long tunnel. Easy to monitor, then another secure door, then a decontamination chamber, then another door. The idea is to slow things down, to detect, to contain any breach long before it reaches the city's heart. Access isn't about keys, it's biometrics, retina scans, palm prints, vocal patterns, things that are hard to steal, and maybe the strongest defense is just not being found. Geographical secrecy, a location so remote, so geologically stable and unremarkable, it never draws attention. But the deeper challenge isn't outside. It's inside, how you stop the society within from collapsing under its own tension. In a sealed environment, a conflict over resources, a power struggle, hoarding, that could be fatal. It unravels the social fabric, and the life support systems depend on that fabric, so it forces a balance. On one hand, the community needs monitoring. Sensors tracking air, water, energy, they're not just for efficiency, they detect anomalies, tampering, a hidden stash on the other hand that creates a surveillance society. Where's the line between collective safety and individual privacy? Would every corridor have cameras? Would personal communications be scanned for signs of dissent? This points to a need, a guardian class, not soldiers, engineers, and mediators. Their primary loyalty is to the city's integrity, to its systems, to its social contract. They'd maintain the barriers, investigate irregularities, to escalate conflicts before they turn violent. Their authority has to be beyond question and beyond corruption. It's an old problem. The thinker Thomas Hobbes, 17th century, he argued that in a state of nature, life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. To escape that, people surrender freedoms to a powerful sovereign, a leviathan to enforce order. The underground city is the ultimate version of that bargain. Absolute mutual dependence demands an absolute commitment to the rules. The social contract here isn't abstract. It's written into the oxygen supply. Protocols for conflict would be different. With no exile possible, punishment has to focus on restoration, reintegration, restorative justice circles. Where harm is addressed by having the responsible party repair the damage, reconcile with the community, that might become the norm. The goal is to heal the breach. Not create a permanent outcast festering in the depths, because in a closed system, every person is a critical component. You can't afford to waste a single one. And this focus on internal stability leads right to the foundation, to daily life, the system for who gets what and why, the economic model. It has to ensure no one ever feels desperate enough to break the city to save themselves. In a sealed city, the currency is survival. Money doesn't exist there. Gold is useless. Stock certificates mean nothing. So the whole economy has to start over, built around one idea, dividing limited resources fairly. It's not capitalism, it's not socialism, it's more basic than that, a resource-based economy, where what matters is air, water, food, living space, energy. The way to share those would probably be a mix, a guarantee for everyone, a foundation, so much food, so much water, a place to sleep. That's the social contract. It just says, because you're here, you get to live. But above that line, a different economy starts, a contribution credit system. Your main job, farming or maintenance or teaching, that gets you your essentials. Your place, but for extras, for luxuries, for more room or real coffee, you earn credits. Credits for innovation, for dangerous work, for things that help the community's spirit. Art, music, it's a meritocracy, but a tangible one. Think of a starship crew. The engineer and the doctor, they both eat, they both have a role, but the one who finds a way to double the food supply, or who settles a conflict, they might get a little more. Some recognition. The point is to motivate people without creating desperation. Now you could have other systems. A pure barter system would be chaos in a closed loop. If the mechanic wants art and the artist needs bread, the trade fails. Or a digital ledger, a perfect record of every calorie you eat, every watt you use, everything you contribute. Total transparency, but also no privacy. Your worth becomes a number, a calculated thing. Getting rid of old wealth doesn't end inequality, though. It just changes what's valuable. Knowledge becomes currency, skill, social capital. The engineer who knows the geothermal systems has soft power. The archivist who controls the cultural database has influence. A new hierarchy forms based on who's indispensable. That creates a tension. The city needs these experts, but it has to stop them from becoming a new ruling class. So you'd need rules, knowledge sharing, mandatory training, so no one person holds all the keys, but all of this, the whole structure, depends on one thing. The food supply. If the hydroponic farms fail, if a blight hits, the model collapses. The contribution system loses all trust when the basic ration is at risk. Then everything reverts to a brutal calculus. Hoarding starts, the strong take from the weak. The shared mission breaks apart into a fight for the last calorie. So food security isn't just about farming. It's the foundation of all law, all order, all cooperation underground. It's what keeps the peace, and this focus on absolute need, on keeping the body alive, naturally shifts attention to the systems built for something else, to the vaults that don't hold seeds, they hold souls, the chosen legacy of a world that's gone. Deep in the city, the rhythm is set by light. Pink and blue glows pulsing, vast chambers stacked floor to ceiling, a perpetual artificial day. This is the agricultural heart, a farm without sun or soil. Plants grow in a mist, their roots dangling in air. That method is called aeroponics. It uses 95% less water than traditional farming. The yields are staggering. Dwarf wheat, genetically selected for compact growth, produces grain in tight, efficient towers. Walls of emerald green algae thrive under the precise spectrum of LDs. Rich in protein and oxygen, this isn't just farming, it's high-density biochemistry, turning light and carbon dioxide into the fundamental blocks of life. The system is a closed loop. Below the plant racks, shallow pools shimmer with movement. That's integrated aquaculture. Tilapia and other hardy fish species are raised there. Their waste provides natural fertilizer for the plants above, and the plants, in turn, filter and clean the water. It cycles back to the fish, an ancient symbiotic relationship recreated with digital precision. Every gram of waste is accounted for, processed and reintroduced as fuel for another part of the cycle. Nothing is truly discarded, it's all merely transformed. Moving from one life form to another in a silent, perpetual dance. But resilience requires diversity. A single blight, one new pathogen, could wipe out an entire monoculture crop. Threaten the city's food security. That's why the most secure vault isn't for gold or data. It's the seed bank, a cryogenically frozen library of genetic potential. Thousands of varieties are stored here. Grains, legumes, vegetables, fruits, a living backup of Earth's botanical heritage. Maintaining this diversity is a sacred duty. The botanists periodically grow out samples, not for harvest but to preserve the genetic strength and adaptability of each line. This bank is the biological insurance policy. ensuring that no matter what challenge emerges, the community has the raw material to adapt and survive. This biofarm is more than the metropolis's stomach. It is its metabolic engine. Its continuous humming operation frees the community from the constant anxiety of scarcity. When your next meal is not a question, your mind can wander to other questions. It allows engineers to tinker with improving the light spectra for better growth. It lets biologists experiment with new algal strains for higher nutrition. It creates a stable foundation from which other sciences can grow. The surplus energy from a secure food system gets redirected into labs, into workshops, into the quiet pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. The farm's success doesn't just fill bellies. It creates the intellectual space to wonder, to explore, and to build upon the legacy they were tasked to preserve. This stability, however, invites its own form of pressure. With survival assured, what becomes the new measure of a life? How do you find purpose when your world has no frontiers left to physically explore? The life support hums, that's the background, but there's another sound underneath it, the sound of thinking. The city has solved its basic survival, so the extra energy, the surplus, it all goes into the mind. A question comes up, could this sealed place become an engine for a new kind of creativity? A renaissance, but not from open exchange, from focus, undiluted focus. Up on the surface, innovation gets driven by market cycles, by shifting funding, by the noise of competing ideas. Down here, those distractions are gone. The problems are clear, they're long-term, they're existential, that could channel science with an intensity you don't usually see. Teams could spend decades on one single process. Like pulling trace minerals from bedrock, getting near total efficiency, or mastering the quantum quirks of superconductivity in a perfectly stable chamber. Deep underground where there's no vibration, the geology around them becomes a lab, a living lab. They could map the Earth's mantle with a precision that's impossible on the surface. Listening to the planet's deep hum, their isolation becomes a vantage point, a unique one for discovery. History shows glimpses of this, the Islamic Golden Age. Scholars in Baghdad and Cordoba, they had stable patronage. They synthesized knowledge from across the known world. They made leaps in math, astronomy, medicine. Because they could focus, they had a protected environment, medieval monasteries, isolated by design. They became centers for preserving knowledge and slowly advancing it. Through copying, through contemplation, the confinement didn't stifle them. It concentrated their efforts. This underground city is a modern version of that. An extreme version. Its survival depends on closed-loop chemistry, on low-energy physics, the drive to make an air recycler 1% more efficient. Or to grow food with less light. That drive could lead to breakthroughs, fundamental ones, in material science, in biology, breakthroughs that ripple far beyond their original purpose. But then there's art, the soul's expression. Art here would face a different pressure. With no natural world to depict, would it turn inward, become abstract? Exploring the shapes of machinery, the play of artificial light on polished stone, or would it become hyper-realistic, a longing, captured in detailed murals of forests and oceans? Forests no living resident has ever seen. The art might serve a new function, a communal one, not just decoration, but psychological maintenance, vital maintenance. Symphonies could be composed to counter the stress of confinement. Subsonically, stories would be told, not just of the past, but as thought experiments. Intricate ones about social dynamics, they become tools for teaching empathy, for conflict resolution. This creative output isn't a luxury, it's the lifeblood. The intellectual and emotional lifeblood for a society that has to endure for generations. It prevents a slow descent into a purely utilitarian existence. Where life is measured only in calories and kilowatts, this raises a tension, a pivotal one. Does necessity mother invention, or does absolute isolation eventually stifle the serendipity that sparks genius? On the surface, a chance conversation can trigger a new idea, a forgotten book in a shop, a walk in the rain. The underground city has to engineer those chances. Consciously, it has to build spaces for unstructured exchange, fund pure research with no immediate application, deliberately expose its citizens to the wild diversity of thought. The untamed diversity preserved in its archives, its creative fire depends on a tether, a deliberate, careful tether, a deep connection, a reverent one, to the very thing it was sealed away from, the chaotic, beautiful, messy knowledge of the world above. To thrive, the city has to remember something. It's not just preserving a static snapshot of civilization, it's tending a flame meant to be carried back into the light one day, and that future return. It hinges on a decision made long ago. Who gets to leave? There's one room with the only window to the world above. That's the watch. The walls are all screens. Data streams, grainy video feeds. A small group of men and women work there, the watchers. Their duty isn't to govern the city below, it's to listen to the silence above. They monitor a network of hardened sensors, autonomous drones scattered across the surface before the Great Ceiling. These devices measure everything: ambient radiation, atmospheric composition, temperature fluctuations, particulate matter in the air. They listen for radio signals. They watch for the slow return of green. The protocols are precise, etched into law. Surface checks happen on a regular schedule, unvarying, not out of hope, out of discipline. The parameters for habitability are strict. Multi-variable equations. It's not enough for the air to be breathable one day. The readings have to show stability for months, then years. The sensors need to detect a thriving biosphere. Recovering soil microbes, returning insect populations, the gradual reclamation by plant life. A single positive signal is just data. A sustained pattern is what they wait for. The waiting is the core of the duty. This vigil carries a weight, a profound psychological weight. For most citizens, the surface is an abstraction, a story in the archive. For the watchers, it's a daily reality, intimate. They witness the slow-motion drama of a planet in flux. They might watch a drone feed for years, nothing but the rusting skeleton of a forgotten city. Being swallowed by vines, then, one cycle, a deer steps into the frame. It's a staggering moment, a sign of life's resilience, or they might witness the opposite. A promising region succumbing again to a toxic bloom, a sudden geological shift. That's a different kind of toll, to see a door begin to creak open, only to watch it slam shut again. The watchers have to report these oscillations without despair, without undue optimism. Their emotional neutrality is as critical as their technical skill. They're the city's compass, and a compass can't afford to feel. This role cements the city's identity. It's a temporary arc, a purposeful pause. The very existence of the watch denies any fantasy of permanence underground. It whispers to every generation, this isn't the end of the human story. It's a chapter written in darkness, waiting for the next page to be lit by the sun. The watch is the thread connecting the seed to the future soil, and sometimes the sensors detect something the protocols didn't anticipate, not just biological signals. Technological ones, a structured radio transmission on an old emergency band, the heat signature of a controlled fire, too regular to be natural, the fleeting image of another drone. Different in design, skimming the horizon, this is the moment the entire mission pivots. Contact, the possibility that other arcs endured, other refuges. The protocols for this are the most complex, debated for generations in theoretical councils. Do you respond? How? With a simple mathematical pulse, a recorded message of peace. The risks are immense. The other group could be cooperative, a potential partner for eventual recolonization, a source of new genetic diversity, shared knowledge. Or they could be desperate, hostile, seeing your city not as a sibling in survival, but as a vault of resources to be plundered. This possibility explodes the narrative. The isolated experiment is over. The city is no longer alone. It must now engage in the oldest human practice, diplomacy, but diplomacy without a shared history. Without common language or trust, conducted through crackling speakers, carefully worded digital text, it introduces the potential for alliance, for a merged future. And just as potently, it introduces the specter of conflict, a war fought not over ideology or land, but over the last functioning water purifier, the last seed bank. The Watch, once a passive observer, could become the front line in a new kind of struggle. This changes everything. It forces the city to look outward. Not just with curiosity, with strategy, to remember that humanity in all its forms is what they were built to preserve, even the parts they may have to fear. The crackle of a radio signal, it changes everything, a voice in the dark. It means your city isn't alone. Another enclave survived. That first communication is careful. Cautious, you exchange basic data, atmospheric readings, geological stability, a shared vocabulary for survival. This is diplomacy stripped down, no flags. No embassies, just bandwidth and the need to verify intent. Is this an offer of alliance or a probe testing your defenses? Protocols debated for generations are suddenly real. And they're terrifying. Multiple cities underground create a new world, a subterranean geopolitics. The geography isn't about rivers, it's about access. Access to stable geothermal vents for power, to rare mineral seams for electronics, to aquifers of pure water. These are the strategic resources now. An enclave rich in geothermal energy but poor in genetic diversity might trade, offering power for hardy crop strains, for medical data. A smaller city with a masterful archive of pre-collapse schematics could barter that. Trade for vital minerals. This trade isn't about luxury, it's about correcting critical deficits. Each arc was designed in isolation. Now they have to fill the gaps. History offers a parallel. Polynesian cultures navigating between isolated islands. They built intricate trade networks across the ocean, exchanging tools. Food, ideas. That connectivity prevented stagnation, provided a buffer against local disaster, but isolation also bred unique identities and sometimes conflict. The dynamics of the deep would mirror this. A loose confederation could form, a network for sharing technology, for maintaining a collective genetic library. More robust than any single vault, they might establish a neutral communications hub, a digital agora for resolving disputes, for coordinating research. Yet the potential for conflict is inherent. If one city's life support fails and its requests for aid are denied, what choices remain? It could attempt a desperate migration. Force entry into a more stable enclave. That's the nightmare scenario. A war fought in cramped tunnels, over air and water. The goal couldn't be conquest. There's no territory to seize, only a single fragile habitat to control. The goal would be assimilation or annihilation. That threat makes mutual defense pacts a logical development. A chilling one, not for expansion, for existential deterrence. A promise that an attack on one sealed city would be met with a response that could cripple another. A balance of terror buried under a mile of rock. This forces an evolution in political thought. The old ideologies were built on growth, on open frontiers. Down here, the ideology is managed equilibrium, profound interdependence. Leadership becomes about fostering trust across a void. Ambassadors are chosen for technical understanding. For emotional stability, treaties are written in lines of code, defining resource exchange rates, establishing verification systems. The highest law is the preservation of the species, which now explicitly includes the other. This fragile web of connection makes each arc stronger, more adaptable, but it does something more subtle. It rekindles a sense of a broader humanity. For citizens who have known only their own corridors, the idea of another community is a psychological lifeline. It expands the world. It proves the human project wasn't reduced to a single desperate gamble. That in the deepest dark multiple lights were kept burning. This interconnectedness is the final rehearsal, however tense, however carefully managed. It's the practice run for the greatest diplomatic mission, not talking to another buried city, but to the silent, waiting world above, preparing together for the day the great doors finally roll open. The signal from the watch was a declaration, a sustained green light across all parameters. The surface was ready. That moment, anticipated for so long, triggered a reckoning. The Exodus Protocol is the most complex document we have, and it starts with a question for every citizen, a referendum on what home means. For some, the data is an invitation, a call to a destiny their ancestors prepared. For others, the ones born here in the hum of the biosphere, it's a threat, a demand to leave the only world they've ever known for a terrifying emptiness. The divide is immediate. The surface dreamers talk about duty, about legacy, fulfilling what the founders intended. The deep-born talk about safety, about community, and the insanity of leaving a perfected system for a wild, damaged unknown. This conflict is the real first test. Can a civilization built for unity in survival navigate a fundamental choice about its own future? The founders' intent becomes the central text. That original mandate to preserve and eventually return is clear, but laws written centuries ago can't account for the lived experience of people who grew up without a sun. Is the intent a binding contract or a guiding principle, something open to reinterpretation by the people who have to live with the consequences? Councils would study the founders' logs, not just for technical data but for their spirit. Were they building a lifeboat to be abandoned at the first safe shore, or were they planting a seed for a new kind of human tree, one that could grow in any direction? The answer determines everything. Assuming the choice is to return, the strategy is generational. The first phase isn't resettlement, it's reconnaissance. Small, heavily protected teams with decontamination airlocks on their vehicles would begin surface surveys. They map the geography and the microbiology. They introduce hardy pioneer species from the city's vaults, lichens, bacteria, plants engineered to stabilize soil and begin repairing the atmosphere. This is active re-terraforming, a painstaking process of nudging a wounded biosphere back toward health. It could take decades before the first child is born under the open sky. The preparation for those who go is immense, physically and psychologically. They have to relearn basic instincts. The deep-born have no innate fear of heights, but the sheer scale of an open horizon could trigger a visceral panic. Their immune systems, accustomed to a pristine environment, would be dangerously naive. Gradual exposure in controlled surface domes, built as stepping stones, would be essential. They'd be taught to read weather in clouds, not on screens, to find direction by the sun's arc. The resettlers wouldn't be colonists reclaiming a lost homeland. They'd be aliens gently learning to inhabit a new and ancient planet. This possibility completes the circle. It ties the entire underground project back to the oldest stories that inspired it. The cycle of death and rebirth, the seed that sleeps in the dark earth waiting for the right conditions to sprout. In myth, this was Persephone, spending part of each year in the underworld, her return bringing spring. It was the phoenix, consumed by flame only to rise anew from the ashes. This metropolis is a technological phoenix, a civilization that chose a symbolic death, a retreat into the earth to preserve the ember of its being for a future renaissance. So the ultimate success of the metropolis isn't measured by how long it lasts in the dark. It's measured by the wisdom of its people when the light returns. Do they emerge with the tools to heal or with the old reflexes to conquer? Do they see the resurgent world as a garden to tend or a resource to consume once more? Their choice in that moment of return is the final test, the definitive test of everything the city was built to preserve. It asks if we can learn not just how to survive an ending, but how to begin again. With more grace than we had before, Agartha, that name comes from a different blueprint altogether, not engineering, mysticism, a legendary inner world kingdom. Said to lie beneath our feet, accessible through the poles, it acts as a mirror to our survival metropolis. In the lore, the inhabitants aren't refugees. They're guardians, an advanced, enlightened civilization. They retreated inward not from catastrophe, but from the spiritual decline of the surface. They preserve ancient wisdom. Lost truth, not seeds and schematics. Theosophist writer Madame Blavatsky described it as a sanctuary of secret masters, a spiritual reservoir for a future age. The contrast is stark. Our engineered city is born of pragmatic fear, a lifeboat built by engineers. Agartha is born of spiritual idealism, a temple maintained by sages. One is a fortress against physical collapse, the other is an ark for metaphysical knowledge, but the parallels are undeniable. Both are hidden worlds. Both are conceived as preserves of something precious the surface has lost or threatens to destroy. Both operate on inward retreat as a strategy. Jules Verne captured this romantic vision. In Journey to the Center of the Earth, explorers find vast subterranean oceans, lost ecosystems, a world within a world teeming with primordial life. Verne's vision, like the Agartha myths, turns the underground into a realm of wonder, not just survival. This comparison shows a pattern, a human pattern. The modern underground metropolis takes that ancient mystical longing, it secularizes it, technologizes it. It takes the dream of a perfect, hidden world, a Shambhala, an Agartha, and rebuilds it. Not with magic, with hydroponics and geothermal taps. It replaces enlightened adepts with teams of botanists, psychologists. The goal shifts from spiritual preservation to biological continuity. Cultural continuity, yet the core impulse is similar, eerily similar. It's the impulse to create a separate reality, a purified space, safe from the perceived chaos of the outer world. The corruption, the decay, this bridge from legend to blueprint shows how deep these narratives are wired into us. They aren't mere fantasies, they're cultural prototypes. Explorations of a solution to a fundamental anxiety. When the world becomes intolerable, where do you go? The mystic says, go inward to a realm of spirit and secret knowledge. The engineer says, go downward to a realm of controlled systems and stored data. Both are seeking a reset, a way to bypass a broken present to seed a future. This enduring pattern reveals something. Our most advanced survival architectures are the latest chapter in a very old story. They are the material answer to a mythological question. And that raises a final point. If these stories of hidden worlds are so persistent from ancient underworlds to modern bunkers, what does that say about our relationship with the surface world we call home? It suggests a tension, a love fraught with a deep-seated knowledge of its fragility. We build these refuges because we cherish what we have, enough to imagine its loss. And because we believe somewhere that a remnant must endure, even if it has to wait in the dark, listening for the right moment to begin again. The blueprint gets tested in stories. Fiction has explored the underground city for a long time. City of Ember is a society in a huge, old cavern. Their power comes from a generator that's breaking down. Light is their currency, it's how they measure life. The story is a race against a permanent dark. It's about scarce resources, but it's more about decay. The people have forgotten their history. They were supposed to be a temporary refuge. The escape instructions are lost. They've disintegrated. the drama isn't just the way out. It's that the society stopped looking. They accepted the shrinking light as the whole world. That story focuses on a vulnerability. Memory and mission are fragile over generations. Then there's the Fallout series. Its vaults were sold as perfect shelters, but really many were experiments. One vault had a door designed never to open. To test absolute confinement, another had 1,000 people and 500 sets of clothes to create conflict over resources. These stories change the threat. It's not the catastrophe outside, it's the engineered malice inside. The danger is the planned dysfunction. It's a critique of the planners. The power to design a closed world is also the power to design a prison. Or a lab. The anxiety is about control and who has it when there are no checks. A newer example is the Silent Sea on a lunar base. It's a sealed habitat pushed to its limit. The crisis is water scarcity, but it's made worse by secrecy, by a chain of command that puts the mission above lives, by a scientific experiment meant to ensure survival. An experiment that creates a new threat instead. This story is about ethical compromises in extremis. How far will leadership go to preserve the collective when everything is rationed? Even the truth, these portrayals are cultural thought experiments. They take the engineering premise and stress test the human part. They ask what happens to the social contract under the pressure of closed walls. They show the loss of purpose, the corruption of power with no oversight, the moral weight of choices made to keep the lights on. Our fascination with these stories processes the same anxieties that make the real idea compelling. They let us walk through worst-case scenarios from a safe distance, and they point to the unresolved questions. If we built such a place, who decides the rules inside? What safeguards would stop it from becoming a dystopian vault? The fiction shows the pitfalls, so if we ever go from blueprint to reality, we might remember to build a better story. Selection is a shadow. It's the question that turns a plan into a moral problem. Who gets a seat? The moment you answer, you define the whole purpose. Is it a random sample of humanity saved by chance, or a collection of the most useful skills saved for utility, or a fortress for the privileged saved by wealth? Each choice tells a different story about what we think is worth keeping. A pure lottery seems the most fair. A random draw says every life has inherent value. But that randomness has a brutal weight. It means the engineer and the artist have the same odds as someone with no obvious survival skill. In the harsh math of a lifeboat, that feels like a risk. The philosopher Garrett Hardin called this the lifeboat ethics dilemma. If a lifeboat has limited seats and swimmers outnumber them, who do you pull aboard? Do you fill it to the absolute limit, risking everyone, or do you keep a safety margin knowing it means leaving many behind? There's no clean answer. Only trade-offs. A meritocracy of skills seems rational. You select for the best chance of success. Doctors, engineers, farmers. This values the collective future over individual fairness. It builds the ark with the most capable hands, but it creates a hierarchy of human worth. It says your right to survive is tied to your utility. So what about the elderly, whose wisdom isn't quantifiable? The children who are a drain before they contribute, the philosophers, the poets. A city of only technicians might survive physically, but would it keep the soul of a civilization? This system also assumes we can predict which skills will be needed. The historian of science might be more vital to navigating social collapse than the mechanical engineer. We can't know. The darkest possibility is the ark as a commodity, a sealed place for the ultra-wealthy and powerful. This turns the refuge from a humanitarian project into the ultimate instrument of inequality. It makes a survivalist elite, a class that literally retreats from the shared fate of humanity. This isn't just a fear. We see its seeds now in luxury bunkers and private orbital flights. The ethical breach is profound. It severs the idea of a common destiny. If the project is built with private capital, do its creators have a moral responsibility to those outside? Or does their investment buy them a separate future? This scenario turns the metropolis into a monument not to preservation, but to abandonment, and that leads to the responsibility toward those left on the surface. Would the chosen few, safe below, listen to the world above going silent? The psychological and moral burden of that knowledge would be permanent. Every celebration, every milestone, shadowed by the memory of the billions not granted that chance. Could a society built on that foundation ever be healthy, or would it be forever stained by a primal guilt? This question moves the debate from logistics to the core of human empathy. Is preserving a fragment of humanity at such a cost still a victory for humanity at all? These ethical layers extend to the project's footprint. To build such a vast underground structure takes immense resources, energy, rare metals, geological disruption. Is it ethical to consume so much of a struggling world's remaining capital to save a fraction of its people? The endeavor itself could be an act of consumption, worsening the very crises it seeks to escape. There are no easy resolutions, only scales that can't balance. To even consider building such a place forces a society to stare into a mirror and decide what it sees. The answers determine whether the underground city is an act of noble desperation or the final failure of collective care. Building a refuge could end up causing its own kind of harm. That's the environmental paradox here. To protect a piece of civilization from a global threat, you might first have to damage the planet you're trying to save. The scale of digging for a city of thousands, it's hard to picture. You're not just digging a basement, you're moving mountains of rock, carving out caverns the size of cathedrals. That process takes staggering energy. In the initial world before collapse, that energy would likely come from fossil fuels. The carbon footprint of building this place could be immense. It might actually speed up the very crises it's meant to withstand. Then there's the operation. A sealed city is a thermodynamic machine. It generates constant waste heat. All those lights, computers, air processors, people, they produce thermal energy. That heat has to go somewhere. On the surface, it dissipates into the atmosphere. But underground, in a confined space, managing that heat becomes a critical challenge. You'd need massive heat exchange systems. They'd likely vent warmth into the surrounding bedrock or into groundwater. Over decades, that could alter the local geology. Warm aquifers might shift. The stability of the rock sheltering the city could be subtly compromised. Compromised by the persistent, artificial fever of the habitat inside. The water demand is another profound risk. A city like this would need a secure, independent aquifer. Tapping into that deep water source could lower the water table for the region above. It could drain springs, affect surface ecosystems, impact any communities still trying to survive up there. The act of securing survival for a chosen few might inadvertently undermine the resilience of the broader landscape, making recovery for those outside even harder. It's a stark version of a lifeboat dilemma, but here the lifeboat is actively drilling holes in the larger ship. This forces a rigorous assessment, a full life cycle analysis of the project. From mining rare earth metals for its electronics to the permanent alteration of a deep geological site, the metropolis leaves a mark. The principle at play is something like planetary medicine. The first rule is to do no harm. Does building a giant underground ark violate that rule? The answer might push the design in a different direction. Instead of one colossal, centralized vault, maybe the solution is a distributed network. Many smaller, interconnected refuges, scattered in stable regions worldwide. Each one has a lighter footprint. A failure in one doesn't doom the entire endeavor. And they could be tuned to their local environment, using specific geothermal features or aquifer systems without overtaxing any single one. This networked model mirrors healthy ecosystems. Diverse, redundant, resilient, because they're not dependent on a single point. This practical hurdle ends up refining the vision. It asks us to consider not just if we can build such a place, but how. How to build it in a way that honors the world it's meant to preserve. The metropolis can't be an act of ultimate consumption. Its design has to embody the sustainability it hopes to foster in a future world. That shifts the goal from mere survival to a form of symbiotic stewardship, even in retreat. The methods used to carve out this dark haven would become the first lesson for the society born inside it. A lesson in balance, in consequence, in the humble understanding that no sanctuary is truly separate from the world that surrounds it. The legacy it leaves in the rock may be as important as the legacy it hopes to carry forward. The founders faced a problem of time, millennia, not years. How do you keep a society focused on a distant goal, something no one alive has ever seen? That's the real test. There's a project that captures this, the Clock of the Long Now, a mechanical clock being built inside a mountain in Texas, designed to run for 10,000 years. Its purpose isn't to tell time, it's to make us think on that scale, to force the question what matters in 100 generations. An underground city demands that same perspective. It's not a project for the builders, it's for their great-great-great-grandchildren and beyond. The central challenge is mission drift. The original crisis, the war, the collapse, the pandemic, it fades from living memory. It becomes a story, then a myth, then maybe a forgotten footnote. For the third generation born down there, the surface isn't a lost home, it's a fairy tale. Their ancestors' urgent escape becomes a curious historical fact. Why would they care about a sun they've never felt? Their world is here, it's stable. It's safe. The idea of leaving for a terrifying wilderness could seem like madness. That's the quiet danger, not a system's failure, a loss of purpose. A society that forgets why it exists. To combat this, the city's culture needs built-in memory. Ceremonial practices become vital infrastructure, an annual rereading of the founding charter. Not as a legal document, but as a performance, a retelling of the Exodus with light and sound, making the fear and the hope visceral again. Education wouldn't just teach engineering. It would be steeped in deep history. Children learn the names of the founders. They study the geology of the surface from archived samples. They're taught the principles of the original crisis, so they understand what they're waiting out. The architecture itself would be a teacher. The design passively reinforces the mission. Maybe the main concourse is laid out as a map of the continents above, etched into the floor. The daily walk to the agricultural levels passes a vast, sealed window. It doesn't look out. It displays a continuous, slow-motion simulation of ecological recovery on the surface. The central plaza could feature a monumental sculpture, not of a person, of a seed cracked open with a sapling emerging. Art and symbol become tools for continuity. This long-term thinking transforms everything. It shifts the city from a reactive shelter into a proactive civilizational project. It becomes a seed, consciously designed to remain dormant for centuries, then germinate when conditions are right. The work is no longer just about maintaining life support. It's about maintaining a thread of intent, a fragile thread passed from one set of hands to the next across a gulf of time. That places a profound responsibility on every generation. They aren't just citizens, they're temporary stewards of a promise made long ago. Their duty is to keep the flame of purpose alive, to prepare their children for the same endless vigil. And to trust that someday, a generation they will never meet will finally walk into the light. The walls here, they don't have windows, but they can show you anything. For these children growing up down here, they get two things passed down. Both are essential. One is the manual for survival. They start young, learning the language of systems. They trace the water recycler lines on interactive diagrams. Their math lessons are calculating nutrient mixes for the aeroponic towers. As teenagers, they apprentice in the geothermal plant. They feel the deep hum of the earth right through their tools. Medicine is taught as more than biology. It's the art of keeping human health stable inside a closed biome. All of this is intensely practical. It creates engineers, farmers, technicians. Their hands keep the lights on. That competence isn't optional, it's the foundation. Everything else is built on top of it, but the second thing they get is the soul of this place. It's the preserved memory of the surface. History isn't a list of dates. You put on a light headset and you stand in a simulation, a pre-collapse forest. You hear leaves rustling, leaves you'll never touch. You see dappled light from a sun you've never felt. They learn ecology by diving into virtual coral reefs. Those reefs are just data patterns now. They learn the symbiotic relationships that once balanced a whole planet. Languages aren't just grammar, they're taught as songs, as poetry. The unique sounds of cultures that lived under open skies. The arts are central. Children paint with pigments described as cerulean, crimson. Colors that only exist in the archive's spectral records. They compose music trying to capture wind over plains or rain on stone. This curriculum answers a deep need. It makes sure the citizens aren't just machine maintainers. They're understanders of a legacy. They have to know what they're protecting, not just how to protect it. That creates a challenge. How do you teach the visceral reality of a river to a child who's only known water from a tap? The instructors use multi-sensory simulations. The student feels a mist on their skin. They hear the roar of cascading water through directional speakers. They see the relentless flow in high-fidelity projection. They study the hydrologic cycle as a kind of planetary poem, but the teachers are honest. They explain this is a translation, a best attempt to convey something infinitely complex with the limited vocabulary of their technology. Take the concept of a mountain. It's taught through geology and myth. They learn the physics of tectonic plates pushing rocks skyward. And they also read the poems, the legends, from every culture that saw mountains as sacred. As challenges, as homes, the mountain becomes a mineral fact and a symbol of aspiration. This whole educational system is the quiet engine of cultural continuity. It's the glue binding each generation to the original mission. Without it, the society risks a slow decay. The practical skills could turn into rote ritual, performed without understanding. The great purpose, the return, could fade into a vague superstition. By splitting the curriculum, the founders created a tension. The student of hydroponics also studies the lost rainforests. She understands her work in the mist-filled chamber is a tiny, desperate echo of a vast natural system. The engineer maintaining the atmospheric processes learns about ancient Earth's climate. He sees his dials and filters as an attempt to replicate a miracle. It makes you think, what's the core knowledge you have to pass on to keep a culture alive? Is it the technical know-how to sustain the body, or the stories and arts that sustain the spirit? This deep city argues it's both, in equal measure. Its schools produce custodians, people who can fix a broken water line with skilled hands, and who can also explain with reverence why that water is sacred. They're trained for a life of maintenance, but educated for a destiny of rebirth. That balance is what prevents stagnation. It keeps the culture even sheltered from becoming static. It's always in a dialogue with the ghost of the world above, learning from it, mourning it, and preparing one day to greet whatever comes next. A sealed city is a living culture. It's not a museum piece. Its main law is survival, but that law creates a tension. You have this relentless focus on stability, on keeping every system within safe parameters. And you have to ask, does that focus smother the forces of change? The forces that make a society vibrant? The imperative is continuity, but life pushes toward evolution. Can both exist inside the same enclosed space? History gives us two different mirrors for this. Japan during the Sakoku period, borders closed for over 200 years. That isolation wasn't stagnation, it created an inward flowering, a unique culture developed in art, in philosophy, in social refinement. The pressure of isolation made a diamond of cultural specificity, but other isolated societies show the opposite. Small islands, remote valleys, without external stimuli, without new ideas or new neighbors, technologies can plateau. Social structures can become rigid, they can calcify. The focus becomes preserving tradition, preserving it at all costs. So which path would the underground city follow? The risk of rigidity is real. Social roles set up for efficiency could become hereditary in all but name. The son of a hydroponic engineer becomes an engineer. The daughter of an archivist goes to the library. It's not law, it's expectation. It's limited educational pathways designed for system maintenance. Over generations, that limits diversity, intellectual diversity, and it creates a genetic bottleneck. That's a biological reality, a founding population of a few thousand. No new genetic material entering the pool, recessive traits become more common. The careful genetic screening of the founders gets tested over centuries. The society would have to manage pairings, manage them with a long-term view of genetic health, and that practice it walks a line between medicine and social control. But then, could the pressures of this environment catalyze a different evolution, not just social, biological? Humans are adaptable. Generations born under constant artificial light might develop eyes more sensitive to that spectrum. Their circadian rhythms could tune to the city's unchanging 18-hour day. Bodies used to a stable 72 degrees, consistent humidity, they might lose some robustness. The surface dweller's adaptability to temperature swings. This isn't about growing gills, it's about subtle shifts, gradual shifts, a population becoming optimally adapted to its artificial biosphere. Over centuries, the divergence becomes significant. They might become a subspecies unintentionally, Homo sapiens subterraneus, their bodies shaped by the endless hum. The lack of meteorological surprise may be their cognitive patterns too. This forces us to see the metropolis not as a vault, not as a snapshot, but as a petri dish. A new experiment in human development. The culture inside wouldn't be the culture that entered. It would be changed by its own survival. The stories would evolve. The art would take new forms, responding to cavern walls, to the glow of LEDs, not to sunsets and forests. And then the question becomes identity. If the people who eventually emerge are biologically distinct, culturally distinct from the founders, can they still fulfill the original mission, to restore a civilization they no longer resemble? Or does the act of preservation transform the thing being preserved, transform it into something new? The city's greatest achievement might not be preserving the past. It might be accidentally giving birth to a future its builders never imagined. The deepest vault holds light, encoded light. That's the city's true nervous system, its collective memory. A digital archive of staggering scope, not just the text of books, but high-fidelity scans of paintings, recordings of symphonies, three-dimensional models of ancient architecture, immersive documentaries of lost ecosystems. A citizen can strap on a headset and stand in the Sistine Chapel, hear the echo of a space they'll never physically touch. They can walk through a simulation of a pre-collapse rainforest, the humid air, the calls of exotic birds, the complex scent of blooming flowers, all recreated from chemical analyses and audio recordings. This archive is more than a museum. It's the preserved sensory experience of a world. To manage this digital soul, the city relies on artificial intelligence stewards. They're not ruling intelligences, they're sophisticated librarians and tutors, programmed with deep ethical constraints. their core directive is preservation and education, not control. An AI steward could guide a child through the physics of a waterfall while the simulation renders its mist. It could help an engineer diagnose a filtration problem by cross-referencing every known technical schematic in history. These entities become the guardians of context. They ensure the why behind every preserved artifact is never lost. They're tireless, patient teachers for a society that cannot afford to forget. This digital layer expands into leisure, into necessary psychological relief. After a shift maintaining geothermal pipes, a citizen might spend hours in a perfectly rendered virtual forest. Hiking a trail that no longer exists, families could share a meal in a simulation of a Parisian café from the 1920s, the sounds of a bustling city square surrounding them. These experiences aren't frivolous, they're vital maintenance for the human spirit. They combat the sensory deprivation of a life without weather, without horizons. They provide the novelty and beauty that the concrete corridors cannot, but this presents a profound challenge. If the simulated surface, with its perfect sunsets, its diverse landscapes, its rich history, becomes indistinguishable from the real, or even superior to the scarce, damaged reality the sensors report, does the real remain the goal? Why risk the immense danger and uncertainty of a physical return when a satisfying, beautiful existence is available at the touch of a button? The archive, meant to be a bridge back to the world, could become its own destination. The virtual realm offers freedom from the city's constraints without any of its mortal risks. That creates a critical tension for leadership. The digital soul is a sanctuary, a repository of identity that keeps the culture vibrant and connected to its roots, yet it also presents the risk of a gradual, societal withdrawal into a comfortable fantasy. If too many citizens prefer the flawless digital past to the arduous project of rebuilding a future, the entire mission could fail from within, from a quiet loss of will. Managing this becomes a subtle art of balance, ensuring the virtual world inspires action rather than replaces it, that it serves as a window to look out of, not a door to permanently close behind. The first law wasn't for the founders, it was for their grandchildren. These first architects had a different kind of burden. Their choices about power, about social structure, they weren't just administrative. They were geological, they were carving the riverbed. Everything after would flow through that shape, the layout of the commons, the principles of justice. It would all echo for 1,000 years, so the leadership model couldn't be built for charisma. It had to be built for continuity, maybe a council of elders, where the main qualification was wisdom earned over decades down in the deep, or a rotating directorship, so no single person, no single family could ever consolidate permanent control. There was another model, though, one that borrowed from the archive's own purpose, a guided democracy with a singular, symbolic leader, the archivist. This figure wouldn't rule, they'd be the living conscience of the mission. Their sole power was ceremonial, to read the founding charter at each succession, and to ask the one forbidden question, have we forgotten why we are here? The transfer of authority becomes a ritual, the city's most important ceremony. It can't hinge on bloodline, it can't hinge on popularity. It has to be a process that identifies a specific kind of wisdom. The ancient Greeks had a word. Phronsi's practical wisdom, the wisdom of the navigator, not the mapmaker. It's the ability to judge the right course when the rulebooks fail. In the unchanging dark, the greatest threat is a novel problem. A slow leak in a seal no one's ever repaired. A social conflict the old protocols don't address. So leaders are chosen for their proven capacity for that. For Phronsi's, a history of solving the unsolvable with empathy, with creativity, with a commitment to the whole. Their inauguration is a pledge, not to power but to stewardship. They're given the master keys to life support, and with them, the weight of every breath in the city. This demands a profound sacrifice from the founders themselves. They are planting orchards in soil they will never feel. They are calibrating systems that must outlast their names. Their entire labor is an act of faith in a future they are choosing not to inhabit. Their legacy isn't a statue. It's the quiet hum of the air processor in the night. It's the child who learns to read by the light their grandparents designed. Their monument is continuity, the unbroken line of purpose passed hand to hand through the silent centuries. That long-term vision is the only thing that can counter the pull of the present. The temptation to use resources for comfort now at the expense of stability later. But this carefully built legacy, this chain of wisdom stretching into the dark, it faces one ultimate test. A threat emerging not from the forgotten sky above, but from the trusted earth below. The very geology that shelters the city holds its own ancient unpredictability. A seismic shift missed by all the surveys, it could stress the cavern walls, a previously unknown geothermal vent. It could overheat a critical chamber. The earth, their steadfast protector, could become an agent of chaos, facing a catastrophe born from the sanctuary's own foundation. That would be the final trial of Phronses. It would force the leaders of that distant generation to make choices with the same courage as the founders, but with a terrifying new variable. Their safe world was never truly safe. It was only patiently waiting to remind them that all human plans, no matter how deep, are built on a planet that has its own older story. The deep hum changed. It shifted into a low groan. You felt it in your bones before you heard it, then a sound like stone tearing. The tremor was brief, but the consequence was absolute. A fault line previously unknown, sleeping in the bedrock for eons, had stirred. The shockwave traveled through the city's skeleton, and it found a weakness. A primary water reservoir, a cavern holding the lifeblood for 10,000 people. It developed a hairline fracture. Under that immense pressure, the hairline became a crack. And the crack became a rupture. Emergency lighting came on. It bathed the corridors in a stark red glow, and the klaxons started. That sound drilled into every citizen from childhood. Their rhythmic pulse began. This was no drill. The breach protocol was immediate. It was brutal. Automated bulkhead doors, meters thick, began to slide shut across the city, segmenting it into isolated zones. Their purpose was containment, to sacrifice a limb to save the body. The residential sector next to the reservoir was already flooding. The water poured in, cold and dark with terrifying force. Citizens had minutes, maybe only seconds, to reach the higher sublevels before the seals locked. Families were separated by the closing doors. The choice to seal was made by Central Command, but it was executed by local stewards, engineers who had to look into the faces of their neighbors, and then activate the mechanism that might seal their fate. It was the lifeboat ethics dilemma, rendered in real time with real water rising. In the Central Command nexus, data screamed across screens. Pressure readings plummeted in the main aqueduct. Structural sensors in the cavern roof showed new stresses, alarming ones. The response was a symphony of contingency. Teams rerouted auxiliary water lines from the agricultural banks to the residential drinking supply. Power was diverted, taken from non-essential systems to reinforce the pumps fighting the flood in adjacent sectors. The city's geography was being rewritten in an instant. Sections marked green on the maintenance maps turned red, then black as they were abandoned to the inundation. This was resilience in its rawest form, not about preventing the disaster, but about managing the cascade of failure that followed. The systems had redundancies. But those redundancies now had to work under conditions they were never meant to face. The psychological impact was profound, and it spread faster than the water. A foundational belief was shattered. The earth itself, their steadfast protector, their eternal shield, had turned against them. The sanctuary was not impervious. Its walls could bleed, For a society built on the principle of controlled safety, this introduced a chilling variable: chance. The meticulous plans of the founders could not account for every secret the planet kept. In the days that followed, as pumps labored and engineers assessed the permanent loss, a quiet dread settled alongside the grief. If the ground could betray them, what then was truly safe? The trauma redefined their relationship with their home. It was no longer a perfect womb. It was a complex, living geology that they inhabited on borrowed time. This event tested cohesion like nothing else. It demanded collective sacrifice for collective survival. Those in the secure sectors rationed their water without complaint. Knowing it was being sent to those displaced, medics and counselors worked around the clock, treating both physical injuries from the scramble and the deep shock of sudden loss. The social contract, that abstract agreement, became tangible. It was in the shared blanket. The extra shift worked to cover for a grieving friend, the silent understanding that passed between strangers in a corridor. The crisis either forged a deeper unity, or it would fracture the society along new fault lines of resentment and blame. The unforeseen catastrophe highlighted the ultimate survival trait. Not perfect foresight, but relentless adaptability. The city's engineers, drawing on archives of ancient mining disasters, devised a daring plan. They would not attempt to reclaim the flooded sector. Instead, they would seal it permanently and build a new reservoir in a stable adjacent cavern, a project that would take years. The metropolis would have to reconfigure its entire water distribution network on the fly. This adaptability, this capacity to absorb a shocking blow and then redesign around the wound, proved more valuable than any static blueprint. It showed that the true strength of the refuge was not in its unmoving walls, but in the flexible, resilient minds of the people within them. The plan was perfect until it wasn't, and in that imperfection, the human endeavor found its most defining moment. The Underground Metropolis story, it's not really about the darkness down there. It's about the light we bring with us. You see it in the old myths, the whispers of hidden places. You see it in the engineering plans today. It was never just an escape plan. It's more like a mirror that shows everything about us: our fears of losing everything, our sudden cleverness, that quiet will to keep going no matter what. We've seen its shape in places like Derinkuyu, that carved stone city, in the tunnels under Beijing. We've imagined walking those corridors, thinking about the rules people would live by down there. The hard choices: who gets to come in when the world ends. We've pictured tending the farms, guarding the servers, all while listening for a signal from a sky they might never see again. And all of that points to something. The project in the end isn't about giving up. It's a kind of love, a fierce, desperate love. Building a refuge like that, it's not turning away from the world. It's trying to preserve it in the most extreme way you can. You're trying to keep the fragile, beautiful things safe. The knowledge in a library, the truth in a piece of music. The bond of a community that decides to face the long dark together. So that metropolis, if it was ever built, it would be a monument, a statement about what we think is worth saving. Its very design would be an argument about human value, and whether it ever gets built, that's almost not the point. The power is in the questions it makes us ask right now, while we're still under the open sky. What do we, as a species, actually value? What's the core of our culture we'd fight to pass down through 1,000 years of silence? How do you balance the need to survive with the duty to care for people outside the walls? Those aren't just questions for engineers, they're questions for everyone. This whole thing has been a descent into a thought experiment, one of humanity's oldest, most persistent dreams. Thanks for walking those imagined corridors with me.